What happens when a woman who built her career on silence, control, and precision is suddenly pushed into the loudest room on daytime television? By a question that wasn't supposed to be asked, and a tone that wasn't supposed to cut that deep. Before we go any further, subscribe to Stage View right now, like this video, and drop a comment letting us know whose side you think this moment will land on, because what unfolded next wasn't just television, it was a collision. The lights of the studio were too bright for a conversation this personal. They always were. Daytime TV had a way of disguising tension with pastel colors and polite applause, pretending that everything said beneath those lights was safe, controlled, harmless. But that morning, the air inside the View felt different. Thicker, like a room holding its breath. Charlize Theron sat upright in her chair, legs crossed with the practiced elegance of someone who had walked red carpets since her 20s. Her posture was perfect, almost statuesque, the kind that suggested calm to the untrained eye. But there was a stillness about her that hinted at something else. A coiled awareness. The kind that comes from years of being misunderstood, dissected, quoted out of context, and expected to smile through it all. Across from her, Joy Behar leaned slightly forward, cue cards resting loosely in her hand. She had that familiar half-smile on her face, the one viewers recognized instantly. Sharp, playful, dangerous if you were on the receiving end. Joy had built an entire persona around saying what others wouldn't, and today, she seemed especially comfortable in that role. The audience applauded as Charlize was introduced. It was warm, enthusiastic, genuine. She nodded, smiled, waved briefly. To them, this was just another celebrity interview. A promotion. A conversation. But inside Charlize's chest, something tightened. She had done this before. Hundreds of times. Interviews where the questions were framed as curiosity, but felt more like judgments. Where her activism was praised in one sentence and subtly undermined in the next. Where being a strong woman somehow always invited a challenge. The first few minutes went smoothly enough. Laughter. Light banter. A joke about Hollywood schedules, another about parenting. Charlize answered with grace, choosing her words carefully, as she always did. Her voice was calm, controlled, warm, but never careless. Joy watched her closely. Too closely. And then it happened. Joy tilted her head, tapping her cue card against the desk as if thinking aloud. "You've always been very outspoken," she began, her tone casual, almost admiring. "About power, about men in Hollywood, about the system. Some people say." Charlize felt it before the sentence finished. That subtle shift. The moment when admiration turns into challenge. "Some people say," Joy continued, "that it's easier to be outspoken when you're already at the top. When you're beautiful, successful, protected by fame. Do you ever think about how that comes across to women who don't have that kind of platform?" The studio went quiet in a way that microphones can't capture. It wasn't silence, it was anticipation. Charlize blinked once. Slowly. In her mind, years collapsed into seconds. Growing up in South Africa. Watching her mother survive. Fighting her way into an industry that never expected her to stay. Being reduced to her looks again and again. Being told she was lucky instead of capable. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I think," she said carefully, "that using whatever platform you have to speak about injustice is never something to apologize for." Polite applause followed. Safe answer. The kind that lets everyone breathe again. Joy nodded, but she didn't lean back. She leaned in. "But don't you think," Joy pressed, "that sometimes the way celebrities talk about these issues can feel preachy? Like telling regular people how to feel about things they live every day." A murmur rippled through the audience. A few heads turned. This was no longer a softball. Charlize's hands tightened slightly in her lap. She kept her voice even, but something had shifted behind it. "I don't think advocating for change is preaching," she replied. "And I certainly don't think pain belongs to one group of people." Joy raised an eyebrow. A gesture so small most people missed it, but Charlize didn't. "Well," Joy said, her smile sharper now. "Some would argue that Hollywood activism often feels performative. Big speeches, big statements, but very little risk." There it was. The word hung in the air like smoke. Performative. Charlize inhaled, deeper this time. She glanced briefly toward the audience, then back at Joy. Her expression wasn't angry. Not yet. It was something colder. More deliberate. "Risk," she repeated softly. "You think speaking out hasn't come with risk for me?" Joy shrugged, a half-laugh escaping her. "Compared to the average woman? I mean, you're still getting roles. Still invited everywhere. Still. Still what? Charlize interrupted, her voice firmer now. The interruption landed like a dropped glass. Audible. Sharp. Joy paused. The co-hosts shifted in their seats. One of them opened her mouth, then closed it again. Charlize leaned forward for the first time, elbows resting lightly on her knees. The camera tightened in, sensing the shift before the producers did. Still palatable? Charlize asked. Still safe because I smile while I talk? The audience reacted immediately. A collective inhale. A few gasps. This was no longer an interview. It was a confrontation. Joy straightened, clearly not expecting the turn. I'm just saying, she replied, her tone defensive now, that when celebrities talk about struggle, it can sound out of touch. Charlize nodded slowly, as if absorbing the words. But her eyes told a different story. Out of touch, she echoed. With whose reality, Joy? The room was completely silent now. I grew up watching violence in my own home, Charlize continued, her voice steady but charged. I watched my mother survive. I left my country with nothing. I didn't walk into this industry protected. I fought for space in it. Joy shifted again, uncomfortable. And every time I speak about abuse, about power, about inequality, Charlize went on, there are consequences. They're just quieter than people expect. Roles disappear. Doors close. You get labeled difficult. A ripple of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. Joy tried to interject. No one's denying your past. But you are minimizing it, Charlize cut in, her tone still controlled, but now unmistakably sharp, by suggesting that my voice somehow invalidates others. The camera cut to the audience. Faces frozen. Phones discreetly lifted. Joy's smile was gone now, replaced by something harder. Well, she said, crossing her arms slightly, this is the view. We're allowed to challenge perspectives. Charlize didn't look away. And I'm allowed to respond, she said. That's not a challenge. That's a dismissal. The word hit harder than any raised voice could have. Dismissal. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The co-hosts sat still, unsure whether to jump in or let it play out. The producers hesitated behind the cameras. This wasn't in the rundown. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. I think you're taking this very personally. Charlize exhaled, a sound that carried years of restraint. It is personal, she said. For every woman who's been told to be quieter, nicer, less angry so she doesn't make people uncomfortable. The applause this time was louder, less polite. Joy glanced toward the audience, then back at Charlize. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, surprise, maybe, or realization. But the tension didn't break. Not yet, because somewhere between those words and the silence that followed, everyone in that studio understood something important. This wasn't about a question anymore. It was about who gets to define credibility, who gets to speak without being questioned for daring to do so, and what happens when the person being challenged decides not to retreat. Charlize leaned back in her chair, reclaiming her posture, her composure fully intact. But the room had changed. The air was charged now, humming with anticipation. Joy cleared her throat, glancing at her notes as if searching for a way back to safety. The cameras kept rolling. The pause that followed felt longer than it actually was. On television, silence is dangerous. It stretches. It exposes. And in that studio, with cameras locked in and millions of viewers unknowingly leaning closer to their screens, the silence became its own character. Heavy, judgmental, waiting to see who would move first. Joy broke it with a short laugh that didn't quite land. Well, she said, glancing briefly toward the other co-hosts. This escalated quickly. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the audience, but they died almost as soon as they started. The moment was too raw for humor now. Too real. Charlize didn't laugh. She didn't shift. She simply looked at Joy, her expression calm but unwavering, like someone who had already decided she wasn't backing down. One of the co-hosts tried to step in, her voice light, almost rehearsed. I think what Joy means is. Charlize turned slightly toward her, not aggressively, not dismissively, just enough to acknowledge the interruption. I know exactly what she means, she said. That's why I'm responding. The words were measured, but they carried weight. This wasn't defensiveness. This was clarity. Joy straightened in her seat, her jaw tightening. She had been challenged before, plenty of times. Politicians, pundits, actors with something to promote. But this was different. Charlize wasn't sparring for entertainment. She wasn't posturing. She was drawing a line. You know, Joy said, her voice sharpening again, when you sit where I sit, you hear from a lot of women who don't feel represented by Hollywood voices. They feel talked down to. Charlize nodded slowly. I hear from them too. Joy raised an eyebrow. Do you? Yes, Charlize replied. Because they write to me. They tell me their stories. And they don't ask me to be quiet. They ask me not to stop. The audience erupted into applause, this time immediate, unrestrained. A few people stood before catching themselves and sitting back down. The energy had shifted decisively. Joy waited for the applause to die down, her expression tightening with each passing second. But don't you think, she pressed, refusing to let go, that sometimes the conversation becomes more about celebrities feeling virtuous than actual change? Charlize leaned forward again, slower this time. Deliberate. I think it becomes that when people reduce it to that. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Charlize continued. When we frame advocacy as ego, she said, we make it easier to ignore the message. And when that framing comes from platforms like this, it reinforces the idea that speaking up is something to be suspicious of. The studio was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt focused. Intent. Joy exhaled sharply. So now I'm reinforcing silence? I'm saying intention doesn't erase impact, Charlize replied. Especially when the impact lands on women who already feel unheard. One of the co-hosts shifted uncomfortably. Another glanced toward the producer's table, where hands hovered near cue cards and commercial break timers. This was going off script fast. Joy crossed her arms fully now. You know, not everyone agrees with you politically, she said. And sometimes it feels like if they don't, they're treated like they're morally inferior. Charlize's eyes softened, not in surrender, but in something closer to sadness. I don't need everyone to agree with me, she said quietly. I need them to listen. There's a difference. The softness unsettled Joy more than anger would have. She scoffed lightly, shaking her head. Listening goes both ways. Yes, Charlize agreed. It does. And then she paused. I've listened to people tell me my experiences aren't relevant because I'm successful. I've listened to people say my voice should be quieter because it makes others uncomfortable. I've listened to people tell me that speaking out is easy for me. She looked directly at Joy now. At some point, listening turns into erasing. The word hit hard. Erasing. The audience reacted audibly, gasps, murmurs, someone whispering, wow. The co-host who had tried to mediate earlier now stared straight ahead, hands folded tightly. Joy's face flushed slightly. That's not fair, she said. No one's erasing you. Charlize didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Fairness, she said, isn't about intent. It's about outcome. The cameras cut briefly to a wide shot of the table, capturing the visible tension. Joy's foot tapped under the desk. Charlize remained still, grounded. Joy leaned forward suddenly, her voice sharper. So what? Are we not allowed to question celebrities anymore? Charlize met her gaze. Question me, she said. Absolutely. But don't discredit the reason I'm speaking just because of who I am. The audience applauded again, louder than before. This time, the sound carried something else with it, relief. Validation. Joy shook her head, a tight smile returning. I think you're projecting a lot onto what was a simple question. Charlize's expression changed then. Just slightly. The calm gave way to something firmer. Not anger, but resolve. It wasn't simple, she said. It never is. She leaned back, folding her hands together. Women are constantly asked to justify their voices. And when we do, the goalposts move. We're either too angry, too privileged, too emotional, too loud. She looked around the table, then back at Joy. Today, it just happened to happen here. The room felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Joy opened her mouth, then hesitated. For the first time since the exchange began, she seemed unsure. I think, she said slowly, that sometimes these conversations are more productive when they're less confrontational. Charlize nodded once. I agree. Joy visibly relaxed, thinking the tension was easing. But, Charlize added, confrontation isn't created by honesty. It's created by discomfort with it. The audience exploded. Applause, whistles, a few cheers that producers would later struggle to control. The energy was undeniable now. Joy leaned back, her expression hardening again. So now honesty belongs to one side? Charlize shook her head. No, honesty belongs to anyone brave enough to tell it without diminishing others. Another pause. Another silence. The co-hosts exchanged glances. One of them finally spoke, trying to redirect. Charlize, your new film. Charlize turned toward her with a polite smile. I'm happy to talk about it, she said. But I think this matters too. Joy sighed audibly, tapping her pen against the desk. Of course it does, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Charlize caught it. That's the thing, she said softly. When we say of course, but don't act like it, people notice. Joy looked away, just for a second. Toward the audience. Toward the cameras. Toward the reality that this moment was already slipping out of her control. The producers signaled for a commercial break. The red light blinked. We'll be right back, Joy said quickly, her voice snapping back into host mode. The music swelled. The cameras pulled back. But the tension didn't fade. As the applause filled the studio, Charlize remained seated, her expression composed but distant. Joy shuffled her notes, avoiding eye contact. The co-hosts whispered among themselves. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled. Social media teams were already watching clips roll in, engagement numbers climbing by the second. And somewhere, millions of viewers sat frozen, realizing they had just witnessed something rare. Not a viral moment manufactured by outrage, but a real one. Because when the cameras cut back on, and the conversation resumed, the line between interviewer and subject had already been crossed. When the cameras came back on, the applause was louder than before, but it felt different now. Less celebratory, more charged, like the audience wasn't clapping because they were told to, but because they needed an outlet for the tension that had nowhere else to go. Joy smiled for the camera, that practiced television smile snapping back into place. Welcome back, she said brightly. We're here with Charlize Theron. Charlize nodded once, returning the smile just enough to be polite. The distance between them wasn't physical, it was emotional, and everyone could feel it. Joy shuffled her cue cards again. Before the break, she began, carefully choosing her words, we were talking about advocacy and public voices. I think it's important to remember that different perspectives exist. Charlize tilted her head slightly. They always do. Joy took a breath. And sometimes those perspectives clash. They do, Charlize agreed. The co-hosts shifted, sensing the undercurrent. One of them leaned forward, attempting to soften the mood. Charlize, your work with women's organizations. Joy lifted a hand, stopping her. The move was subtle, but unmistakable. Control. Charlize noticed. You know, Joy said, turning back to Charlize, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen movements come and go. And sometimes I worry that Hollywood voices dominate conversations that should belong to everyday people. Charlize didn't respond immediately. She looked at Joy for a long moment, long enough that the audience quieted again. Who do you think everyday people are? She asked. The question landed gently, but it cut deep. Joy blinked. I mean people without power, without platforms. Charlize nodded slowly. And you don't think I came from that? Joy's lips parted slightly, then closed. I didn't say that, Joy replied. But you imply it, Charlize said. When you suggest that my voice replaces theirs instead of standing with them. Joy's shoulders stiffened. You're very sensitive to implication. Charlize smiled faintly. Because implication shapes narrative. The audience murmured in agreement. Joy leaned back, crossing her arms again. So what's the solution, Charlize? Celebrities speak, critics stay silent. Charlize shook her head. No, critics challenge ideas. What you're doing is challenging legitimacy. The words echoed. Joy laughed sharply. Oh, please. Charlize didn't flinch. You asked if my advocacy feels performative. If it's out of touch. If it comes from a place of comfort. Those aren't critiques of ideas. They're critiques of worth. A beat. And women are tired of proving their worth before they're allowed to speak. The applause was immediate and overwhelming. Joy glanced at the audience, visibly irritated now. You know, Joy said, her voice rising slightly, it feels like no matter what I say, you're turning this into an indictment. Charlize's voice dropped. Calm. Centered. I'm responding to what you're saying. Joy shook her head. You're responding to what you think I mean. Charlize leaned in. Then say what you mean. The challenge hung there, undeniable. Joy hesitated. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. I mean, Joy said slowly, that sometimes celebrity activism feels like branding. Gasps rippled across the studio. Charlize didn't react right away. She inhaled, steadying herself. Branding, she repeated. Yes, Joy continued, emboldened now. It sells. It creates an image. And audiences are smart enough to see that. Charlize nodded, absorbing it. You think my life experiences are a marketing strategy? She asked quietly. Joy sighed. I think Hollywood knows how to package narratives. Charlize's jaw tightened, just slightly. Do you know what branding costs me? She asked. The audience leaned forward. It costs me being told I'm difficult. It costs me being labeled angry. It costs me people saying exactly what you're saying now, that my pain is convenient. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Charlize continued. I don't get paid to talk about abuse. I don't get rewarded for challenging power. And I certainly don't do it because it's comfortable. She met Joy's gaze directly. So if you're asking whether I benefit from it, the answer is complicated. But if you're asking whether it's real, don't insult me by pretending it's not. The applause was thunderous. Even some of the co-hosts joined in, clapping despite themselves. Joy's face hardened. I think you're taking my words very personally. Charlize nodded once. Because they are personal. Joy scoffed. Not everything is about you. Charlize's expression didn't change, but the room felt colder. No, she said. It's about every woman who's been told her story is a strategy. The audience gasped again. Phones were now openly raised. This was no longer just television, it was documentation. Joy leaned forward, her voice sharp. So now I'm the villain? Charlize shook her head slowly. No, you're part of the system that decides whose pain is palatable. The word landed heavy. Palatable. Joy stood slightly, then sat back down, visibly agitated. This is getting ridiculous. Charlize remained seated, unshaken. Only because you're uncomfortable. The co-hosts were silent now. No one stepped in. No one dared. Joy laughed bitterly. So discomfort equals wrongdoing? Charlize replied without hesitation. Discomfort is information. Another wave of applause. Louder. Longer. Joy threw her hands up briefly. All right, let's just say we disagree. Charlize nodded. We do. Joy leaned back, exhaling loudly. And that's okay. Charlize tilted her head. It is. But disagreement doesn't require dismissal. Joy stared at her. The studio lights reflected off the table between them, a literal line now dividing the two. For the first time since the segment began, Joy looked tired. Not angry. Not amused. Tired. We're running out of time, Joy said flatly. Charlize smiled softly. We always are. The audience laughed lightly, breaking the tension just a bit. Joy glanced at the camera. When we come back, we'll talk about Charlize's latest project. Charlize nodded politely. But everyone knew something had shifted permanently. Because this wasn't just a clash of opinions. It was a collision of worlds. One that had peeled back the polite veneer of daytime television and exposed the raw nerves underneath. And as the cameras cut to another break, one truth became impossible to ignore. This moment wasn't ending when the show did. When the show finally wrapped, the cameras cut, the lights dimmed, and the audience filtered out. The tension in the studio remained thick, like smoke lingering after a fire. Charlize Theron rose from her chair, graceful as ever, but the faint tightness in her jaw betrayed the strain of holding composure under an unrelenting gaze. Joy Behar sat back, arms crossed, blinking slowly, as though attempting to process that the conversation had left its mark far beyond the expected bounds of a routine interview. The co-hosts whispered hurriedly among themselves, heads low, expressions tight. Producers paced behind the cameras, phones in hand, already scanning social media, counting engagement, and bracing for the inevitable storm. But the moment was bigger than metrics, bigger than trending hashtags or viral clips. It was visceral, a raw collision between personal truth and public perception, and it would not fade quietly. Charlize moved toward the exit, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Every step seemed measured, deliberate, as though marking the end of a battle, yet leaving an unspoken challenge lingering in the air. She glanced briefly at Joy, who returned the look with a mixture of frustration, disbelief, and if one looked closely, a flicker of respect. Neither smile was genuine, but both carried the weight of acknowledgement. This exchange had altered the rules of the game. Backstage, the crew buzzed with whispered commentary. Did you see how she leaned in? One camera operator murmured. That was pure fire. Another producer shook her head. I've never seen Joy get so rattled. The clips of the confrontation were already being edited, packaged, and primed for social media, knowing that once released, they would ignite a frenzy. Within minutes, Twitter erupted. Clips circulated with captions like Charlize Theron dismantles Joy Behar on live TV, and the confrontation we didn't know we needed. Viewers debated heatedly. Some praised Charlize's courage, lauding her for standing up not just for herself, but for women everywhere. Others criticized Joy, arguing that her questions were meant to provoke reflection rather than hostility. Memes began to emerge. Reactions poured in from fan accounts, celebrity commentators, and mainstream media alike. The segment had become an instant cultural flashpoint, dissected and analyzed in real time. Meanwhile, Charlize herself retreated quietly, seeking a private corner to collect her thoughts. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages of support, concern, and inevitably debate. Every notification was a reminder that the confrontation had transcended the studio. It had become public property, shared, reshaped, and discussed across the globe. Yet, beneath the media firestorm, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had spoken her truth. She had drawn a line. And she had done it without compromise. Joy Behar, in the green room, ran a hand over her face. The confident, smiling persona she wore on air had frayed under Charlize's precision. She replayed the exchange in her mind, dissecting every word, every pause, every nuance. She had not expected Charlize to meet challenge with unwavering calm and calculated strength, to turn implication into accountability. For the first time, the seasoned host faced the reality that her platform, while powerful, could be confronted with authenticity and unshakable integrity. By the evening, news outlets had picked up the story, broadcasting analysis on morning shows, late-night talk shows, and digital platforms. Headlines blared. Charlize Theron stands her ground on The View. Joy Behar challenged live on national TV. When celebrity advocacy meets real conversation. Social media algorithms amplified clips of Charlize's calm but firm responses, and reaction videos proliferated, each interpreting her words through the lens of personal or political perspective. The moment had gone beyond entertainment. It had become a study in power, authenticity, and cultural resonance. Fans debated not only the substance but the style, the measured tone, the poised body language, the piercing clarity of Charlize's responses. Commentary dissected Joy's intentions, her execution, and the unintended consequences of a question designed to provoke thought, but met with undeniable truth. Conversations spread across forums, dinner tables, workplaces, and classrooms. People were no longer simply watching. They were analyzing, reflecting, even challenging themselves to consider the dynamics of privilege, voice, and accountability. The fallout reached Hollywood insiders as well. Directors, actors, and producers began discussing what they had seen, acknowledging the courage it took to maintain composure while exposing uncomfortable truths. Some offered private praise to Charlize. Others debated internally how daytime television had just hosted a masterclass in narrative and confrontation. Meanwhile, Joy's team reviewed the footage, strategized responses, and prepped talking points for interviews, fully aware that the encounter would define public perception for weeks, if not months. In the days that followed, the conversation did not wane. News segments replayed the moment, dissecting tone, posture, and phrasing. Social media engagement soared as fans dissected every exchange, every gesture. Charlize's articulate defense of her voice became a rallying cry for many, symbolizing the strength to stand firm in the face of scrutiny. Joy's reaction sparked debates on journalistic responsibility, the ethics of questioning power, and the delicate balance between provocation and empathy. Amid the media storm, the audience's response was immediate and passionate. Thousands posted comments sharing their personal reflections, experiences of being silenced, underestimated, or judged unfairly, resonating with Charlize's words. Others debated the nuances of celebrity activism, questioning the line between performative gestures and genuine advocacy. The conversation extended beyond the show, sparking online forums, opinion pieces, and even academic discussions about media influence, gender, and societal expectation. For Charlize, the confrontation became a defining moment, not for the viral attention, but for the statement it made. Standing her ground on a live broadcast, she demonstrated that courage isn't about raising your voice. It's about maintaining clarity when everyone expects you to falter. The intensity of the moment would follow her, of course, in headlines and viral clips, but the personal satisfaction lay in asserting authenticity and refusing to be diminished. For Joy, the experience was a mirror. It reflected not only the power of her own platform, but also the limitations of assumptions, the fragility of perceived authority when confronted with unflinching truth. It was a moment to reflect, recalibrate, and recognize that even seasoned voices can be held accountable in ways they might not anticipate. The studio, once a stage for casual conversation, had transformed into a crucible for authenticity. The audience, both in the room and across digital platforms, had witnessed a rare intersection of celebrity, personal truth, and public discourse. The lines between performance and reality blurred, leaving only the raw, undeniable impact of words delivered with purpose. And as the dust settled, one thing remained clear. Moments like these are why we watch, why we debate, why we share. They remind us that confrontation, when guided by honesty and integrity, can illuminate truths often overlooked. That courage, calm, and conviction resonate far beyond the cameras. That a single exchange, measured, deliberate, real, can ripple across culture, sparking reflection, debate, and change. Now it's your turn. What did you think of the Charlize Theron and Joy Behar confrontation? Whose perspective resonates with you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Stage View for more explosive, dramatic, and unforgettable celebrity stories. Moments that make you feel like you're right there inside the story. Because some moments don't just go viral, they leave a mark.